Hey folks, David Stewart here. Adverbs bad, he said sarcastically. Let's talk a little bit about adverbs for this edition of Storycraft. And a little piece of writing advice that's actually been floating around at this point for decades, which is that adverbs are bad and that you shouldn't use them. That's actually very bad advice, and I'll explain why. But within that advice and the justification for that advice is a tiny little nugget of wisdom, and I'd like to pick out that nugget of wisdom and show it to you and explain it. Before I do that, let me do a couple of plugs. Shadow and Smoke is out now. That's Moonsong Book 3. Pulp Rock is a collection that includes a story by yours truly called Farewell to Once and Future Kings, which is musicians in space, but they're also spies, so you'll probably like that one. I'm enjoying reading the stories by the other authors right now. And lastly, a free collection on Generation Y, My Generation, edited by J.D. Cowan, and that's free. I will have a link to that down in the description. Now, back to adverbs. Are adverbs actually bad? Well, kind of like the passive voice, nothing in the English language exists for no reason. Like, we wouldn't carry on using something that was automatically bad. So that's actually kind of nonsense to say that adverbs are bad or that you shouldn't use them. And in fact, if we were to let's just go to the literature, right? The best-selling authors of all time, do they use adverbs? Yes. Not only do they use adverbs, they use them constantly. So popular authors use adverbs. Best-selling authors use adverbs. Great authors use adverbs. Clearly, it's okay to use adverbs if we're going by the established canon of literature. But what's the nugget of wisdom within the no adverbs? There's actually two little nuggets, but I'm going to start with the big one and the easy one, which will apply both to fiction and to nonfiction. And we'll make a separation between these two. And that nugget of wisdom is, could you use a more accurate verb? So an adverb, what is an adverb? An adverb is a word which modifies a verb. So it modifies an action word. So if you are talking quickly, quickly is the adverb. Usually they end with an ly. If you are jumping quickly, quickly would be the adverb. And so whenever you're using an adverb, the question you can ask yourself, it's a good one to ask in editing, is, can I use a more accurate verb? Is there a verb that better captures what I'm trying to describe? So if you say walking quickly, is the subject running? Now to me, there's a shade of meaning between walking quickly and running. These are not the same things. Likewise, there's a difference between talking softly and whispering. Those are two different things. And so one of the reasons that you don't want to just say, let's not use adverbs, is adverbs are one of the tools that you can use to paint different shades of meaning, to have a subtly different presentation of whatever you're trying to describe. Trying to eliminate shades of meaning by doing things like eliminating adverbs, that's really a form of newspeak. We shouldn't be seeking to simplify the language and eliminate all shades of meaning and therefore shades of thought or anything like that. You should just try to be as accurate as possible, and being as accurate as possible often includes adverbs. Now, I used another kind of word there that I call a weasel word often. So weasel words are often adverbs. And this is the other little nugget of wisdom. If you're using words like definitely, probably, sometimes, these are not necessarily adverbs, but they're words which will weaken your impact. And so therefore they're often adverbs. It's definitely true that this is the case. Well, is it true or not true? We don't need the definitely. If we're saying it's definitely true, we're emphasizing just how true it is, but really we're just kind of making a tautology there. We don't really need definitely. It's probably true. Well, we're weakening our point there. Is it true or is it not true? If it's probably true, what we're trying to do is eliminate the possibility that we will be wrong, but you're also at the same time lessening the impact of what you're actually saying there. And so oftentimes we have to use weasel words, and I'll do a separate video just on it, in order to be completely accurate with what we're doing. Often it's not 100%. When I say it probably won't work out for you, there's a small chance something could work out for you, but I think it probably won't, right? So those are words that can lessen the impact of your writing, and that is something that is really important for the nonfiction sphere. If you're writing in the nonfiction sphere, Adverbs, you can use them, but they will often weaken the point or muddle the point that you're trying to make. And when it comes to nonfiction, the point is to be as absolutely clear as possible. Good nonfiction writing is very clear and, in my opinion, also very succinct. Different people have different ideas about how they like nonfiction, but if you really want to keep a reader's attention, if you are clear and succinct, that means you're presenting the information in a clear and really short way, a way that is very efficient. Then you're going to keep their attention. Now, when it comes to writing fiction, adverbs, you can use adverbs aplenty. Like I said, you go open up some of the most popular fiction of all time, you're going to realize it's full of adverbs because adverbs give you different shades of meaning. And the other thing about adverbs, besides them being different shades of meaning, like there's a difference between walking swiftly or walking quickly and running. There's a difference between running and sprinting. There's a difference between leaping and jumping. There's a difference between hopping and jumping. You want to choose the most accurate verb, and you want to ask yourself, is there a more accurate verb? But often we want to use the shades of meaning. The other reason is that it's often more efficient to use an adverb than to avoid using an adverb. Let's look at the word sarcastically. So one of the ways that you're going to see adverbs used a lot in literature is within dialogue tags. So you have a quotation mark, you have a character say something, you have a close quote, comma and a close quote, then you have somebody said, comma, sarcastically, right? He said sarcastically, right? It's very difficult to try to communicate that adverb, sarcastically, without just saying that he's saying it sarcastically. So the question with dialogue tags is, does the dialogue communicate the content of that adverb without the adverb being necessary? Meaning, can we toss that adverb out and the dialogue, the meaning of the dialogue is still clear? The reason sarcastically is one of those ones you might have to include a lot is because it's not often clear to the reader when someone is speaking sarcastically. Oh yeah, that seems like a great idea. Obviously, we get that, oh, that's sarcastic. Dave's speaking sarcastically there. But it's not as obvious to just read it. Oh yes, that's a great idea. He said sarcastically. Oh yeah, he's saying it with like that kind of Matthew Perry sarcastic sound. We get the idea. Just saying sarcastically, it's very efficient. Now, if you took this like don't use adverbs saying to heart, and you're like, well, I can't just say sarcastically because that's an adverb and that's bad. Adverb's bad. So he said, it sounds like a really good plan. He said, his words dripping with sarcasm. Now, we're painting in a certain way that I kind of like. It might sound cool to say that, but it's a lot more words when you could just say sarcastically, right? So if you start using a bunch of words to replace an adverb, then you're not really being succinct. You're not really being efficient or clear. And I think especially with dialogue tags, you want to be efficient. As a narrator with dialogue tags, you want to get out of the way as much as possible and let the characters interact with dialogue. As a writer, I didn't exactly start with screenplays, but I wrote a number of screenplays before I started writing novels. And I looked and read many, many screenplays as part of that process. And so with dialogue tags in screenplays, you often have this. You'll have a parentheses and it'll say sarcastically, or it'll say, emotionally, or like on the edge of crying. You might have these different directions for the actor to say it a certain way. This would be done in prose fiction by saying, he said sarcastically. That's the dialogue tag that we use in prose fiction. So yeah, you can use that, and they're very efficient and useful for dialogue to describe how the person is saying it in a very efficient way without having to use a lot of words and having to do a lot of painting to describe the dialogue. And like I said, I think that's useful because you want to get the narrator kind of out of that space. And when you have sections of prose, then I think you could be a little more fluid, and you don't have to worry as much about efficiency. But again, you're the writer when you're writing this, and if you want to say, he raised an eyebrow and said, dripping with sarcasm, yes, that sounds like a very good idea, then you can write that. That sounds fine. You know, it just kind of depends on your style and where it is and where you want the reader to pause and where you want there to be a feeling of space between different lines. You can insert lots of those different things. There's many, many subtle ways to write dialogue that control the way that how fast the reader is reading through the page and how they're experiencing that dialogue, way more than I can get into in this little video. But it's up to you as the writer to decide, do I want to be really efficient and use an adverb, or do I want to be less efficient and, you know, write it out with some kind of more florid way of communicating the idea? And then thirdly, does the dialogue even need it? So that's the question that you need to ask as a fiction writer, especially with dialogue. Is the meaning clear without the adverb? In most cases, it is. So I will say that a lot of times, and that's one of those weasel words, a lot of the dialogue I see that has a lot of adverbs, the adverbs are not really necessary. We would get the meaning of the dialogue, we get the intent, we get the delivery of the dialogue, or the delivery of the dialogue is just not that important. We get it from the way the dialogue is constructed itself, and we don't need the adverb to help that along. So yeah, those are the questions you have to ask. So whenever you're using adverbs, you ask, is there a more accurate verb I could use? If it's a dialogue tag, does the dialogue accurately convey that meaning of the adverb? Do we need like that direction tag like you'd have in a screenplay? Do you actually need to include that, or is it included in the words? For something that is sarcastic or sarcastically, you have my permission to use the adverb. It's the most efficient way to describe the character speaking with sarcasm. And it's kind of funny when people are like, adverb's bad, and so they'll say, he said, with sarcasm. With sarcasm is basically an adverb, right? You're using an adverb, but not grammatically. So you're doing the same thing, but you're saying, well, I'm going to avoid the grammatical thing known as adverb, but still use an adverb by saying with sarcasm, right? So yeah, does the dialogue actually communicate that accurately? And then the third one would be, is this a specific shade of meaning that I really want to come across here? Is this a shade of meaning that I really need here? And or is it just like superfluous? A lot of times adverbs are superfluous. So yeah, is there a more accurate verb? Is there a special shade of meaning? Does the dialogue communicate it on its own? And if you can answer those questions about an adverb, chances are you know whether that adverb should remain or it should maybe go. There's nothing wrong with using adverbs. Popular authors use adverbs constantly. I use adverbs in my writing all the time. It just kind of depends on the context of whether an adverb is really good to use or really not that good to use. And so it's going to be a lot of practice on your part as a writer to figure out like the best way to use or to not use adverbs. But generally speaking, if you want to be real efficient with those dialogue tags, adverbs are going to be the way to do it. If you want to paint with many different shades of meaning, adverbs are a way to do that. And I guess the last thing I'll mention is that maybe there's like a more accurate verb, right? A really accurate verb, but it just doesn't fit what you're doing. So if I could say he drank, I don't know, he drank quickly. Now you could replace that with something like he chugged it, right? He gulped it down. Both of those are really great things to say, but it may not communicate the exact thing that you want, and it may not fit the tone of your story. You know, you wouldn't, if you're writing with a very serious tone, you wouldn't say he picked it up and chugged it. So chug might accurately describe there. It might be a more accurate verb than drink quickly, but it may not fit the tone of what you're doing, in which case it's okay to maybe do an adverb there in a situation like that. You're going to have to fill out all the different variations there. But certainly adverbs are not bad. When you're doing nonfiction, you want to be really careful with adverbs because you could weaken your point, or you could just be inaccurate. And the point is to be as accurate as possible. And in some cases, being as accurate as possible does include an adverb. So thanks so much, guys. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I will see you all next time. New book is called Shadow and Smoke. It is out now on Amazon, and it's book 3 of the Moonsong series. You can buy the first book, I think, for just 99 cents. So please check that out and leave me your thoughts down below. Have a great one.